Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, we'll go ahead with this meeting since we're going to have quite a bit of activity. Only those that want to talk, go ahead and sign in up here, and those that indicate their presence can do it after the meeting or when you leave. It's going to take a while for everybody to do that, and so we need to go ahead and get started. First bill we're going to call up is House Bill 910 by Representative Carl Rogers. Are you ready, Representative Rogers?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring back to you House Bill 910. We're working off LC 254485S. And I'm going to highlight everything for you and then try to answer any easy questions.
Hold on just a minute. I think we're having 254485S.
Well, that's what your aide gave me. I assume that's the correct one.
Okay. Everybody in the committee got a copy of that bill? Okay. Proceed.
Okay, if you'll just kind of follow with me, Section 1 defines cemetery and funeral services. It does change the term board to mean the cemeterian board. That's the thrust of the bill. It also changes burial merchandise to include a mausoleum, a cremation urn, cremation markers, cremorials, and that some people have been selling without any regulation. You can read the rest of it. It also specifies that the Secretary of State in making regulations under the cemetery laws acts by and through a board. Just to briefly talk about the changes, in 2000, the Secretary of State passed a bill that was needed for the problems that were occurring back in the 90s. In fact, I know all those problems have been addressed. This act has been in effect now for nearly 6 years, and like any professional group, private business, all I am asking for basically is to set up the board to oversee a perpetual care cemetery. It has nothing to do with a church cemetery. Has nothing to do with a city or county municipal cemetery whatsoever. Those people are totally exempt from this act. This is only private perpetual care cemeteries. Section 2 defines the principal as in principal and interest. There have been some issues arising about what exactly the law means when it says you have to refund principal to a purchaser, and this defines that. Section 3 takes care of some problems the cemeteries have had. They're required to provide a refund out of their own funds to a pre-need purchaser. The Secretary of State's office delays releasing the purchaser's funds from escrow. This just provides that the escrow funds have to be released in a speedy manner, so that a private perpetual care cemetery is not left paying out its own money but unable to reimburse itself. This section also removes the restriction that outer burial containers and vaults can be delivered prior to a need. Section 4, it just changed the code section 10-1414, consistent with the way the Secretary of State operates in Section 1 through the board. As you may know or may not know, there was no board set up when this was done. This was totally done by a particular division of the Secretary of State. And I might add they've done a good job. But I think from the knowledge I know, and fortunately or unfortunately being in this business for a couple of years, which I'm not in anymore, I found that it's time to bring back to the center and let the professionals handle this. If you look at the Act, I think it states that a cemeterian has to be in the business a minimum of 5 years before they can serve on the board. Myself, I was in it a little less than 2 years, and that would disqualify me for serving on the board, which I wouldn't anyway, being a state representative. So Section 5 adds the prohibited acts listed in the cemetery law a prohibition on unlicensed or unregistered people selling burial merchandise. It also raises a limit on a reimbursement to a cemetery owner when they have to assist an outside company in placing a monument in a cemetery. Most of your perpetual care cemeteries, the private cemeteries, keep in mind, they do sell markers and burial merchandise. Now, when anybody that owns a space has a right to buy that marker, shop the marker. A lot of times, like in the cemetery I was involved with, we had an upright section, and those are the marble granite markers. And when these are done by an outside service, which most of them do a good job, there is a cost of maintaining the grounds, which we can be criticized on and be reported to the Secretary of State. So this will raise the fee, or an option to raise the fee, anywhere from $50 minimum, which is in the statute presently, and give flexibility up to $150. I think most people will probably stay in the $50 range, but in the larger markers where you have companion markers, surface mount, you'll see them raise them $100 to the fee, just to help defray the costs that they incur when they have to supply labor. Labor being anybody working for the cemetery, and a lot of times you have to clean up the debris, truck tracks or car tracks when someone's installing a marker. And usually a marker, if it's a granite or marble, these items, these upright markers for the loved ones can weigh as much as 2,000, 3,000 pounds. So you can imagine the damage they can do to a sidewalk, they can do damage to a driveway, and also the ground itself. So, but I think you'll see this used very fairly as far as a family is concerned. Another change is made for transferring burial rights, raising the limit on a fee by $25. That's to only do the paperwork, which there is a cost of administration, paying support staff that we all have to deal with. This section also indexes those fees to the Consumer Price Index, so we won't have to go through the exercise again down the road. Section 6 actually is creating the licensing board, the State Board of Cemeterians, to license and regulate their own industry. It is set up to run just like the other licensing boards in the state, and each of the new code sections is based on existing laws. And let me go back to that. The trusting part of it, that was a major issue in hearings in 98, 99. There was some issues with trusting where, like any industry, you can have dishonest people, doubling of lots, selling of lots, and people putting monies in their pocket, which is totally illegal. But let me stress, in the industry today, of course, I've been in the insurance, property casualty insurance business. Unfortunately, we all have dishonest people in basically every industry you're in today. I think the cemeterians today that I am familiar with and that I know are, good business people. They're professional business people, and they will always do the right thing. I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. I'm sure I've made my mistakes too, but I would say more than the majority of them, in the 75 to 80% range, are straight up, honest, good business people. The board will have 6 members who are practicing cemeterians and 1 consumer member, all appointed by the governor. Aside from the licensing cemetery owners, the main purpose of this board will be to deal with all the issues and regulations involved in the existing Cemetery Act, which is a good bill. There's a lot of teeth in it. I know surrounding states around us, Florida has a stronger licensing requirement, but Florida probably has a lot more elderly people, retired people, and probably have a lot more perpetual care cemeteries. This bill is a good pro-business and consumer orientation toward our rulemaking in the area. Be glad to try to answer any questions. I know many of you are not in the business and may have some questions.
Representative Dean.
I got several questions. I don't understand why we setting up a board, because it seemed to me under this bill, we gonna do everything a board would do. Why are we setting fees, increasing fees? If we go, what would be the purpose of the board?
Well, you have to do it. Representative Dean, there's already a fee set in the statute right now, $50.
That's what I'm saying.
But what it does is it gives them a flexibility up to $150.
My point of it is, it seems to me, if you really believe that we need a board, that ought to be a board function.
It's done by statute, not by ruling. You got to have it in the statute before you can do it
But
in the ruling
board,
reg.
If we're going to set up a board, the board ought to make that recommendation to the General Assembly.
That's what I'm doing.
You're not the board, though. The Secretary of State haven't made this, haven't asked for this requirement.
Well,
increase the fees.
let me reply. I know you have some questions on this. I have been working on this legislation a year and a half and met with a lot of folks. This bill 910 was a vehicle that was left from last year, last session, and Secretary of State people had opportunities to come and meet with me. They did not, and that's their prerogative. We did meet, I think it was yesterday, if I remember right, yesterday, and of course they're in total disagreement with the bill, and I understand.
But you mean to tell me that you've worked on this bill for 2 years?
Yes, sir.
And have not worked with the Secretary of State who oversee this now?
What we're doing, Representative Dean, is still going to be under the Secretary of State's jurisdiction, but what it will allow, just like we do with the massage industry, just like we do with cosmetologists, just like we do with the funeral directors, just like we do with anybody licensing boards, we will allow them to oversee it. You know, I mentioned to you it's been in effect nearly 6 years now, and all I'm trying to do is bring it back in where the cemeterians across this state can have an opportunity to regulate their own industry.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, because I'm not getting my question answered. It seems to me that what the General Assembly would do if we pass this legislation.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said it seems to me what the General Assembly would do if we pass this legislation. We're going to do what the board would do if they was in operation now. We don't. It just ain't been my experience that we do this before a board recommended, and since we don't have a board, seemed like to me that the Secretary of State would recommend it because that's who oversees the cemetery now.
Well, nothing against what they've done in the past. I don't have a problem with that. I think at the time of July 2000, when this bill went into effect, it was probably a needed bill, but not being in the business at that time, Representative Dean. Of course, we vote on a lot of things, and I'm sure you vote on things. I don't know if you read every bill, but I read the bill. The present law is 39 pages. And I've read it 4 times. And,
you in the business?
No.
You was in the business.
I was in it,
okay.
And unfortunately, I didn't read the statute or the rules and regs till after the fact. But that's Carl's fault. That's not your fault.
But I'm not arguing that point
Sure.
at all. I'm not arguing that point.
All right, let's move on.
I'll come back, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Von Epps.
My question is, what problems were in existence when you felt the need?
Well, I think the Representative Von Epps, I think the issue was or has been, these people do a good job, and they're all in here in the room, and they're going to oppose the bill. Secretary of State folks, and that we did meet yesterday, and of course, they had different opinions, and I have different opinions too. I think we've taken a private industry representative, just like you were in private business, and we've overregulated them. I'm not saying it wasn't needed in 2000 or 99 when there was a problem, but I think everything has been brought back to the center now, and it's time to let the professionals in the business oversee, their own licensing as well as be involved with the rules and regs. I can tell you the knowledge I have when rules and regs are passed through. I know cemeterians had made recommendations to the Secretary of State's office, and I'm not saying they're ignored, but they're usually not considered on a high priority.
As a follow-up, if we permitted this, how would this benefit the consumer then?
Well, the consumer, let me just say that the consumer is protected under the Trusting Act as it is. If you come and buy a cemetery lot, there's a trusting amount that has to go. All that is registered. Each year, a cemeterian has to report the previous year, whom they sold lots to, the record of the deeds. They have that authority now to come in and do an audit.
That's in existence.
Oh yeah. We're not changing any of that issue, and just like background checks on people, that stays in. It needs to be done. The businesses I've been in the past and the businesses you've been in the past is, they want to do background checks. I have no problem with that. Financial information is all disclosed, but I think there's an opportunity here to enhance the business. And the reason I say that, the Perpetual Care Cemetery business it's probably been a negative type business for the last 6 or 7 years, not just because of this act, but because of competitive natures with dealing with cities and counties and in churches. And yes, they're in the selling business, they're in the marketing business, but I think every cemetery in the business now, they've got to abide by the book. All I'm trying to do is bring it back to the center where their own profession, just like a druggist, just like anybody's in license, engineers, surveyors, oversee their own industry.
And I guess my initial question was, what problem existed to initiate your?
Well, just to give you a prime example, I had issues when I got into the business, and there again, it's my fault I didn't read everything before, and I blame Carl Rogers for that. But and they worked closely. Secretary of State's office worked closely with me, and they were very polite. But I probably had 30 visits with them trying to get our cemetery in compliance. Most of you remember the former representative, PSC member, Lauren Bubba McDonald. He never would do it, so I had to do it. He was my partner at that time. So I think it's just the repetitive redundance you have to go through, to get it in. It was too much to do. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the process and making sure every I is dotted. And I don't have a problem with that, but you have to be. It's like a lot of businesses. In order to understand them, you have to be in them once to understand them. Just like I've never been in your business, I've never been in the chairman's business, and you learn real quick.
Vice Chairman Tumlin.
I have some just procedural type questions, Representative Rogers.
Sure.
If you could help me out. On 43-8B-5, dealing with the six members have, I guess, is it 6-year terms?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Representative Tumlin.
What are the terms that a board member will serve?
Let's see. Tell me where you are exactly, and I'll try to.
Page 4, line 19.
Yes, sir, 5 years.
Did you give any thought of maybe the first board ought to be staggered? I mean,
Have no problem with that. It should be.
okay, and these are just three quick
Sure,
bullets.
sure.
The fee structure to reimburse the Secretary of State for administering this, is that already in the current bill?
Well, there is not. There's no dollars in there now, but I can tell you, most of you got a copy of the audit that was done. And I'm going by memory. There's probably 6 employees, full and part-time, working for the Secretary of State in this area now. Usually when a board is set up, they have an executive director and a staff. I personally feel like there's enough money probably in there, and I know the board members, if they have this opportunity to be a board member, and I've talked to several cemeterians. I said, guys and ladies, you may have to waive any fees for, for meeting per diem, which they have told me they're in agreement with.
I
But-
meant the fees by the members, just like CPA's paying. the
Right,
Secretary of
right.
State.
I think do you still have a copy of the audit I gave you? It was here in the hearing time, so.
But it's not addressing the bill.
No, it's not.
And one last one, because I don't want to blame this. On page 5, 14 and 15, you got a board member can also be an inspector. Is that not a problem or conflict there?
I don't think it is.
And wouldn't the inspector report back to the board?
They do. They do. The investigators do. Correct. They do. I do have a copy of the audit here, and everybody during the hearing, everybody got a copy of it. I know you get so much, but right now there are over 6.6 full-time and part-time employees working in this division. And I think I stated to you, Representative Tomlin, I can't remember if you were here at the last, when I did the first hearing or not. I think I stated there were 228 cemeterians at that time in business.
So they're already paying dues.
They are. Everything's set up and going now. Let me correct. I think the Secretary of State's office corrected me yesterday. There's only 211 right now. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think once a board is set up and some of these issues are addressed, you may see a pickup in this business, no pun intended, but you may see more perpetual care cemeteries come on board.
Representative Freeman?
Representative Rogers, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Hope you are.
I am, thank you. The board is set up and going to be looking at policy and procedure for cemeteries.
Well, rules and regs, yes.
Rules and regs.
Correct.
And when somebody's found not to be in compliance with those rules and regs, what will the board have in its authority to be able to do that?
Well, it'd be the same thing that's in the existing law right now, which the Secretary of State's office will handle.
So they'd be turned over to the Secretary of State's office?
Well, yeah, all your licensing boards are with the Secretary of State. Down in Macon, isn't that where you're from?
That
Down in
is
there?
where I'm from.
Okay.
We'll keep it there, too.
Yeah.
Does this grow government or does it shrink the size of government?
I think it helps the free enterprise system. And when I say that, I don't know what kind of business you're in. I know you and I have talked about it, but I think it's a situation just like a dentist or, again, a surveyor, engineer. We need to let them oversee their industry. They're the professionals. And I'm not saying these people behind me are not the professionals. And I think they've done a good job. But I think it's time, from my experience, in a short period I was in, it's time to let the people in this business oversee their own business. And most of these boards, and most of the boards do a good job. Now, I've got some boards that I've had to deal with that, I prefer not to discuss at this moment, but they can be difficult. Boards can be difficult. But I think when you don't have a board, it can be even more difficult.
Trevor, Dan, I'll let you have one more question.
Well, I don't really want to. I want to hear from Secretary of State. I don't
Okay, I think you're going to hear from him. Okay, thank you, Representative Rogers.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to invite the audience now to make comments, and I believe the Secretary of State's office is the first one. Tanya?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Tanya Curry, and I am the division director that's responsible for the cemeteries area. We also regulate charities and securities. As Representative Rogers has noted, we are here to oppose this current bill today in its current structure. The current act was enacted in 2000 because of all sorts of egregious problems that were happening in the industry prior to that, and he touched on some of those. Since that time, and as some of you may remember, we held public hearings. Secretary Cox held public hearings in Marietta, Albany, Columbus, Macon, Augusta, and Savannah. And we just had droves and droves of people come out and speak to this issue. As a result of that, the laws were strengthened, and I won't go into all the details, but on that one-page summary that I left with you, there's a list on the front page that shows some of the things that were strengthened in the current act. We feel, as Representative Rogers has noted, that we work very closely with all the registrants. There are about 210 perpetual care cemeteries in the state, but there are also merchandise dealers and funeral home directors that are left out of the scope of this particular legislation, and so that's one bit of concern that we have. The other issue that we have is that the fees and the proposed fee increases, we're not opposed to all of them, but we want to talk about the amount of those fees, and we're also think that they should be adjusted to the Consumer Price Index, but on a 3-year basis in connection with the same way some of the other fees are adjusted. So because the bottom line is those fees do translate on to the consumer, and we don't want the public to have to bear those fees unnecessarily. The third issue that we have is with the board structure. This particular type of board, as it's proposed, is different from the professional licensing boards that are currently administered by the Secretary of State's office. Those boards have professional standards that are already set and already established. I believe most of them are examined boards where people actually have to take a test in order to be licensed, and none of those types of guidelines have been set up in this particular situation. And so I don't want to, I have a long list of things to say, but I don't want to take up a lot of your time. But I do want to say that we believe that this is an issue that needs to be studied more, that needs additional input from not only our office, but the public and the industry, just to get their input on it. So I would entertain any questions that you have, and thank you for allowing me to comment today.
Any questions in the committee for Ms. Curry?
My colleague said that he met with you all on yesterday.
Yes, sir.
Is that the first time to discuss this legislation?
That's not the first time he was approached. We have a person in our office, Mr. Thomas Shue, who's our legislative person. He attempted to speak with Representative Rogers last year when the first bill was dropped just to repeal the act in its entirety. Of course, we were all in a frenzy about it, but we had heard that he was going to hold hearings and so forth, and so we expected to be consulted. When it came up again this year, we also tried to reach him and speak with him, and ultimately got the meeting last week.
Any other questions, Ms. Curry? Representative Bearden.
Yes, sir.
Is it not true, ma'am, that the Secretary of State would still be over this newly created board?
The way that it's structured, yes. The only thing is the way the act as it exists is still out there. There are just some inconsistencies that don't match up with this particular bill that haven't even been addressed. So you'd be starting out with a structure that has some inconsistencies and some things that don't match up statute-wise. But I do believe they envision that.
If you have oversight, then what's wrong with professionals being the first line of defense, so to speak, to address the problems that may arise in their area of expertise and business?
I'm sorry?
What's wrong with professionals being the first line of defense, so to speak, to address problems that may occur in their area of expertise or business?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And again, we work very closely with the cemeterians whenever they do have problems, and with the complaints that come into our office. I mean, currently in my office we have over 500 open complaints, and probably a third of those are in the cemeteries area, and we're generally able to resolve them, and the cemeteries are very responsive. But there's nothing wrong with them regulating their own area. It's just that it's just not set up completely or enough to do that.
I don't know if this is really a question. It always just sounds like y'all afraid to lose a little bit of control of an area that may be better managed by the experts.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I definitely wouldn't say that.
That was just my opinion, though, ma'am.
Okay.
Anything else?
Representative Graves.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to, it just dawned on me, you'd say it's not completely laid out, but isn't the purpose of boards is to promulgate rules and regulations as to how things will function and flow? Once the board is in place, that's their first role, is to promulgate those rules and regs of how it will function and what it does in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office.
That is certainly the case, but one thing that you have to remember is on our professional licensing boards, we provide an administrative support function to those boards. They provide everything else. They're freestanding, and so we just feel like there hasn't been enough thought put into this process in order to allow them to do that.
Well, but isn't that, again, that's one of the functions of a board, is to set up those standards and those professional practices. We don't put those all in statute because we don't. That's what the function of the board is to come together, those people that do that for a living and have an understanding of that business, and they set those rules and regs. That's what it's for. That's why we don't put all the others in statute.
That's true.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I understood you to say you have so many complaints that are open cases, and a third of them are related to cemetery.
There are care and maintenance issues. There are contract issues. And again, the cemeterians are very good with helping us resolve those. We don't have many instances where we have to, issue an order against a cemeterian. But people do have, they do have issues. And it's a very emotional area, as you know. You're dealing with families and you're dealing with communities, and so they look to our office to help them kind of mediate between that. If the registrants are also the mediators and are also the people that are, they're lodging the complaints against, there's going to be some time period where the consumer is left out of the picture.
Under this 910, because I think I was trying to see what the makeup of the board. This is not going to be a board of all cemeteries.
The way it's structured, yes, it's supposed to be 5 cemeterians and 1 consumer. No representation by merchandise dealers or funeral home directors.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Will Phillips. I represent AARP Georgia. We represent over 940,000 Georgians. And we rise today to, urge some caution and some patience with this issue. Everything I've heard today sounds like we had a whole host of problems 6, 7, and longer years ago. But certainly since the inception of this law and since this body was put into place, we've had a much better situation for consumers. And that, I think, is the most important thing to understand. We are not for any changes in the law that would take any additional consumer representation out of this body. We also are concerned that additional fees, if there are significant increases, are only going to be passed on to consumers. And I think consumer is the key word to remember when dealing with this legislation, and would echo the Secretary of State's office's comments in encouraging this group as well as the entire group to study this issue a little further and include all stakeholders in the process of deliberation. And would thank the committee for the time today and entertain any questions. Okay, thank you. Yes.
You mentioned the fees, and I definitely wouldn't want to do anything to pass that along to the customer, but that is where it would end up being. But that's the place in this bill that I have the least problem with. I thought it was very conservative. It was going from 50 to 150, but you're talking about maybe a $2,000 marker, and they're just talking about the maintenance fee to get that thing put in. And then the next fee that they went up was only $25. So I thought that was pretty reasonable. It's probably the most reasonable thing in the bill. But that was your concern, and I want to make sure is that your only concern?
Oh, by no means is that our only concern. And I think, the fees that would be passed, that would be determined by this board probably would be reasonable. But we want to make sure that there's consumer representation involved in setting those fees. And as the gentleman questioned earlier, one consumer on the board taking the Secretary of State's office in many ways out of these decisions. We think that letting the professionals manage these affairs, certainly that industry should be involved in some type of regulation of themselves. But pure self-regulation, we think, is dangerous, and that is a very significant concern of ours.
I don't think they're asking for pure self-regulation because they still have oversight with the Secretary of State. Is that not true?
Yeah, I mean, that would be true. I guess that our main point is that this system has worked very well, and we think that it can continue to work well without significant changes. And if we do want to make changes, I think bringing more stakeholders into the process to talk about these things. We've heard today that there has been very little discussion. And it was before my time with AARP, but I know that my organization was very much involved in coming up with this legislation along with other folks. But certainly bringing more people to the table to discuss these things would be something that we would encourage.
I guess, Sam, I guess by us setting the fees now, if you put a board in place and they saw the need to raise the fees some more without any input from the Secretary of State or anybody else, I mean, this could be dangerous as far as the consumer is concerned. I thought they were premature for us to create a board and raise the fees before the board take place. And so that's part of the problem I have in voting for this bill. I'm not against boards because it looks like everybody, though, came to us and asked us to set up board. But I am against us doing the work of the board through legislation. And that's when I don't see the need for setting up a board if you go do all this stuff before the board even get into operation. And that's why I think we might need to study this legislation a little more.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. My name is Brandon Shields. I'm with Roberts and Shields Memorial Company here in Atlanta. I would like to briefly just make a couple of comments and a couple of observations. My purpose here is I'm in the memorial business, been doing this 35 years, have a lot of experience in the industry and working with and around cemeteries. My main concern is about the fees. There might be a little misconception here. There was a couple of misstatements, I think, by Mr. Rogers. That fee is for taking a fax or for getting a phone call and setting up an appointment and then marking the grave or having someone show you specifically where to put it. It has nothing to do with cleaning up around the site or cleaning up the cemetery or doing any work whatsoever. Okay? It specifically states in the 2000 rules if you leave any debris, mess up anything, you're to fix it. I have $1 million worth of insurance to cover that and a $25,000 bond. So we're talking about a phone call, a fax. Someone's specifically saying that's where the marker goes right there. Now, the $50 fee. Florida has a $25 fee and has had that fee since 1992 and it's still in effect. Several other states, since Georgia has passed this law, has passed a very similar law, and the highest fee is $75. I'm not in disagreement that the fee could be higher, but the primary purpose of me wanting to tell you this is a key thing you need to keep in mind. That previous to 2000, it wasn't a 90s situation where there were cemetery abuses with dollar fees and things. It was a 40-year history from the 50s, 40s, 60s. The fees can be used to control and manipulate the sale of the product. If you've got a $400 or $500 marker and you've got a $150 fee that the cemetery is going to be guaranteed, they can control, manipulate, and and affect where that marker's bought with that fee. That can be done. I'm not saying that it will be done, but for 50 years that I've been around this business, it was done. Until that law went into effect in 2000, these fees ranged anywhere from $4 to $5 to $6 to $700 to go out there and do the same thing, point where it goes. So the law was tremendous for the consumer. I connect my business specifically with the consumer. If it's good for the consumer, it works for me. It leaves an open, competitive marketplace for the consumer to have a opportunity to buy whatever from whomever at the best price. But those fees can and will be manipulated to control the sale of that merchandise. And that is my concern with that. I've been told over the last 6 or 8 months that fee was not going to be addressed. It was going to be $50, it could be $100, $125. I've been told it's been bounced all over the place. But that's something you really should concern yourself with, is for the consumer standpoint. If it gets up with tied to consumer price index and it goes up to $150, $175, $200, or anything like that, the customer will be paying through the nose, and they will be controlled somewhat to buy from the cemetery. Once you commit a person to a cemetery, a loved one, they're going to bury everybody else there. And then, therefore, you can't go out and shop at like a set of tires or something. You'd have to pay the $150 or $200 and then start from zero. That's basically what I wanted you to think about, is those fees. $50, $100, that's not a lot of money. But if it gets up into $150 range or higher, the consumer is not going to have a free and open access to buy that marker in the open market. Now, that's a small marker. Now, if you've got a $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 marker, it doesn't make any difference. But thousands of markers are sold every year here that are $500, $700, $150, $200 is a portion of that fee. Absolutely, it was a great thing for the consumer. Literally, I can't impress on you the fact of what fees were charged in '99 and the '90s and the '80s and the '70s. It was hundreds and hundreds of dollars and it wasn't open market. The cemetery had a captive market. They could have made it $2,000. There was even a gentleman in the state that was charging $1,000 to show you where to put a marker. It can be done. It was done every day, routine, day in and day out in the state of Georgia. But I don't think that $50 is too much for what, I mean, that's not the point. It's just you've got to have a balance here. If you're not careful, this thing will get out of hand. It has before. And that's a national problem. This isn't here in the state of Georgia. That's the industry.
I really wished I knew you would come up, so I'll give you one try.
No, I don't. I mean, I think he ought to put it in perspective.
Vice Chairman Tumlin.
Mr. Shields, when you refer to that $50 fee, it says for a casket, then it says for setting of, a monument. Is that $50 or, in this case, $150 over and over and over?
Every person that when you have a merchandise, it has nothing to do with a casket. This is strictly for installation of memorial merchandise. That could be a marker, a monument, a vase, anything that has to do with marking a grave. That's what I'm in that business. So if you go out to install a marker, you have to call them or send a form, fax it or whatever, set up an appointment. You have to give them a check either in advance or when you get there for $50, and they show you where to place it. And they have to find that grave for their own purposes. But I understand that they have to be compensated, and I have a person that I know pretty well in the business, and he says that doesn't compensate him. And that's possible.
No, what I was asking is, like, for the casket part, if they go to Mays Ward, Mays Ward pays $150, and then when you put the monument, they pay $150.
The fees for merchandise, for memorial merchandise, markers, monuments, tombstones, this has nothing to do with caskets or vaults.
It says so in here.
Well, that may be incorrect. Elway.
It says handling the casket purchase from
This has nothing to do with vaults, does it? No.
That's being added.
It says there is $50 in the bill right there. It was 50, and they're trying to strike it to 150. That's for memorial merchandise. What you would see when you walk out there. In other words, monuments, markers, bronze, stone, granite. Yes, sir.
Okay. Hold it. Let's just. All right, Representative Dana,
Okay. I guess you're saying that this fee is absolutely different from what the marker costs.
Oh, the cost of the marker could be anything.
Right.
Whether it's 500,
right,
5,000,
right.
1,000, there's a fee that has to be paid to the Perpetual Care Cemetery for the location.
Just to tell you where to put it.
That's correct.
So
to show us where to put it physically or with a flag or something like that.
So if I'm a consumer and say I want to put a mark on a grave site.
Yes, sir.
And I go out to the cemetery and say, I want to put a mark on this grave site for my beloved.
Yes, sir.
The cemetery would have the right to charge this $150 fee.
If they change
just
it to
do
$100, absolutely, they can
right
charge
now they
$150.
can't charge for $50.
That's correct. That's regulated by the new law of 2000. Previous to that, they could charge anything they wanted to, anything.
And
anything they wanted to.
Mr. Chairman, let me follow up on that because you said that some funeral home cemetery owner said that don't pay for his service.
Yes,
as it is now.
That doesn't pay for his actual cost.
So
now, I would have to say this. In his case, that might be true.
Right.
But in many cases, I do work in about 75 cemeteries in the metro Atlanta area, that I would say it does because they don't even mark it. They'll just point out
That's
there.
right.
They don't do anything. But now, his case, he actually does several steps, and that could be a fair statement. But not in some cases, they do nothing. Literally.
And if we made a board up of cemetery owners, they could raise that higher than.
I wouldn't think so. That would be unthinkable. Because I can tell you right now, you could be adding $500, $700, $1,000 to the cost of a marker. That's what it was in '99.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Shields.
Yes, sir.
I know you're talking about all these different things, and they can charge $150 to point to or put a flag or whatever.
$50 presently.
Presently, right, but it's changed to $150.
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't it say not to exceed? Now, I realize that, if somebody says not to exceed, you can go get the most you can anytime or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But couldn't it just be the fact that if somebody walks out and points to the ground, charge you $25 for that, but if somebody else goes out, brings equipment out there, moves clean, whatever, they can go up to $150.
They don't. Let me tell you this: they don't bring any equipment out there.
No, sir. I ask you a question: yes or no? Is it that they could charge less, but this says not more than? If they're assisting in the installation, as it says here, assisting in the sitting, monument, if they do all that, as the gentleman you refer to, it doesn't cover his cost, maybe he's doing more than pointing to the ground. May not be, but what I'm saying is it could be that, and he could charge less, but if his actual, reasonable costs are more than that, he can charge up to, but not more than that.
That's what the law says. Now you can charge up to $50. You know what every single cemetery is charging? $50.
And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but
no, that does happen.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Let me tell the committee, I know there's some concerns, but there's been an awful lot of work done on this. I know the Secretary of State is totally opposed to this, and it is their livelihood, but I think these people are professionals. The gentleman from Marietta in the monument business, I have spoken to him, you know, if everybody's having heartburn over the up to $150, I don't mind going back to the $50 amount. That doesn't bother me at all. You know, I know in the past there's been some abuse, but everything's been brought back. As far as the board, these are professional people, and they're going to do the right thing. It's not changing the overall statute at all that Representative Dean's concerned about. These are private businesses, and yes, they need to be regulated. But let me say, they need to be regulated by their own industry like we do with 36 other industries and licensing boards. And that's all I ask you to do. And I think 6 years is ample time without a board. Now it's time to bring it back to the center. And I hope you'll consider voting for it. Thank you.
I guess it's your assumption that I don't even see no cemetery folk down here asking for this legislation. That's what puzzles me, is that, no, your day's over. His day's over, but Sam.
Do you want me to reply to that, Mr. Chairman? I have asked them to stay away on purpose, but the president of the Georgia Cemetery Association is here, and I asked him not to speak because I wanted to speed this up. But if you'd like to ask him, Mr. Elway Amaker is standing right here. That's him. He's the president. And I've worked very closely with him in the past. You know Representative Dean? Okay. You know where he lives? Okay.
That we ought to give this a little more thought. From AARP, I'd like to see us study this to the point that we get some point of view from the cemetery owners. I know that Mr. Rogers is a consultant for them, but I'd like to see us. I really would like to see us study this a little more. My motion is to put it in the study committee.
Substitute motion do pass.
Second.
And second on that. Okay. Substitute motion is do pass recommendation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay. Those in favor, raise your right hand. Those opposed? Bill passes 6-2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do pass.
I had two amendments that I'd like to propose.
Too late. Too late, Mr. Chairman.
I'd be glad to work with you. We still got to work through the process.
Okay, sorry. All right, let's move along. I'm going to ask.
I have another committee where you put it on the table.
Okay.
I don't really have a problem with this.
Okay, those that's lost interest in this bill, I appreciate you quietly moving down so we can continue on. The next bill I'm going to call up is House Bill 11542, Representative David Ross. Representative Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am honored to be here with you today. I do better after last night, after dark at committee meetings, after the one we had last night, so I wish you all well. I bring before you today House Bill 1542. Let me give you just a little brief background about this bill. One of the counties that I represent in the year 2004 was 10th in the nation in terms of increase in new housing permits issued. The construction industry in all of North Georgia, particularly in that part that I represent, has literally boomed in the last few years. This General Assembly back in 2004 passed what has become known as the Contractor Licensing Law. That law provided several things, but a couple of the things that it provided was that it would not be implemented and fully effective until July 1 of 2007, and it also provided for a grandfathering provision for people who had experience in the contracting field, and that period to be eligible for consideration to be exempt from the examination and be grandfathered under the provisions of that law expires on July 1 of this year, 2006. What House Bill 1542 simply does is extend the time for the grandfathering provision for 12 months and also extends the effective date of the bill. I think the contractor licensing law that we adopted here back in 2004 was a good law. I think it will protect consumers. I think it has a lot of provisions that were long overdue here in Georgia. I voted for the bill. The problem seems to be, and particularly in rural Georgia, and I represent a rural area, the problem seems to be that for some reason we have failed on the job of educating people out there in the workforce on how they go about actually applying for being exempted from the examination requirements, and so that they can be licensed under the grandfather provisions of that law. I'm not sure the reasons for that, and I'm not here today to assign blame on any party for that. I'm simply asking on behalf of a significant number of employers and people in not only the area I represent, but I know that there's another bill out there very, very similar to mine that Representative Massey Reese introduced that had bipartisan support from many, particularly in Northwest and Northeast Georgia. I think there's just a problem that not a lot of people know what they have to do. In fact, I was concerned to pick up or see a story less than a month ago in the Moultrie, Georgia paper, and that's not an area that I represent, but they did a story on the fact that many of the contractors in that part of Georgia were simply unaware of this. And this bill simply gives us more time to educate those people rather than put them out of business. And that's what I'm asking to do. I know that in my area, I talk every weekend when I'm home and even down here through the week with many, many contractors who are calling saying, can you help me and what can we do? I talked last Friday with an attorney in my community, and she tells me that there are at least 4 attorneys in the little town that I live in that are volunteering their time at evenings and on weekends trying to help these folks comply and go through the process. But here we are, and we're in March, and the clock's going to run out fairly soon. So I would ask you favorable consideration of the bill, and I know, with all due respect to my friends in the Home Builders Association that I've supported and been good friends of mine, I think they're probably not in support of this, and I respect that position. But frankly, I think that this is a fairly minor thing to do, and that the consequences of not doing it are far greater than keeping it where it is. And I would ask you favorable consideration, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions to Chairman Rose?
Well, I don't have a question, though. I am in support of the land, the implementation of. We speeded it up last year, I think, in governmental affairs, and there are some contractors who are having a hard time complying with the new law. And we did say we were going to grandfather some of them in, and that we were going to give them a certain period of time to comply. And so if this to allow a little more time, I'm in support of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Mark Woodall with Associated General Contractors. Very much appreciate the comments from Representative Ralston, and I can assure you we as the commercial general contractors have been getting quite a few calls ourselves. But I do want to kind of point a couple of things out that took place to get us where we are today. Representative Ralston was absolutely correct. In 2004, we passed a bill, House Bill 2003, to create licensure requirement for home builders and general contractors. The bill was not effective because it became effective upon funding. If you recall, in 2004, we bounced that bill about 3 or 4 times on the last day between the House and Senate over the appointments to the bill as well, between the House and Senate and the governor's office. So in 2005, we introduced a new bill to straighten out the appointments, all going back to the governor's office. The bill was funded, and there's a 2-year delayed implementation date before the bill actually is enforced in the field. And as Representative Ralston indicated, there's a provision in the bill. There's 3 ways individuals can get a certificate without taking an exam. One is if you hold a local license within the state of Georgia that has a program of licensure that's comparable to our state program. 2, if you're a Georgia business and you've been in business in Georgia for 5 years and you can document successful completion for home builders, it's 3 projects over that 5-year period. For general contractors, it's 5 projects over a 5-year period. Now, those 2 provisions right there are in play right now, as he indicated, from January 1 of this year until June 30th of this year. It's a one-time exemption, and then they go away. The third option is when someone is licensed in another state, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and they reciprocate with Georgia businesses when we go to operate up there. They'll recognize those folks when they come down here, if they reciprocate with us when we go that direction. First part of Representative Ralston's bill in D speaks to that third exception. Okay, we don't even know who's going to allow us to reciprocate. The current application process is not going to start until July of this year because we need to end this first 6-month period. While we are very sympathetic, I will tell you that probably no one has taken more calls than Suzanne Williams and myself on this bill. And I want to hopefully remind the committee, this is not a piece of legislation that we actually wanted to do to ourselves. We were kind of told by the General Assembly, you need to do it or we're going to do it to you. So we sat down and worked with the General Assembly to fashion the club we're now beating ourselves with. But it is absolutely essential that we get by this first 6-month period and end this grandfathering period, or it will never end. The second thing is we think 2 years is more than an adequate amount of time for folks to understand what's coming. We are doing a traveling program around the state right now, educating folks. We've got stuff on our website that's a frequently asked question and answer and response. And I very much appreciate what Representative Ralston is going through because I'm having that within our own membership. But we have got to go forward with this or it's never going to happen. With all due respect, we do have to oppose our very good friend Representative Ralston on this bill. I'd be happy to try and take any questions. The actual the date July 1, 07, okay, it's law, but it is not going to be enforced in the field as a condition of doing business, as getting a permit until July 1, 07. That date to me is not as concerning as extending this grandfather thing, particularly when it has very, very, very liberal consideration for folks that are Georgia businesses that can document successful completion of projects in order to get that certificate without taking the exam. But if we keep extending that out, in our opinion, it never ends. We need to get it behind us so we can go about doing what the General Assembly directed us to do. That's regulate the construction of homes and commercial projects in the state of Georgia. But it's a debate that's been with us for about 50 years. We finally decided to do it in 2004, and I will assure you we're going to have a glitch bill next year, by the way. As the board right now is promulgating the rules and regs to implement this thing, we're finding a number of issues, unintended consequences. So we will have a glitch bill to address the various issues that are out there prior to this thing being enforced in the field July 1, 07.
Mr. Wood, how does it hurt you to let more people come in compliance, to give them a longer opportunity to do that? I mean, I know your goal is just to make sure everybody's regulated and doing a good job in their performance.
Compliance is not as big an issue as it is for grandfathering. If you keep expanding that window, you never get about actually enforcing. We thought 2 years was we didn't go over and turn the light switch off. It was a 2-year process, actually 3 years, because the bill was passed in 04, was not effective because it wasn't funded. Came back in 05 and funded it, and then the 2 years started. So it's 3 years that this has been out there. And we are doing everything. I think the Secretary of State's office is also going on the road here with a number of programs to try and put that information out there. So giving folks time, I think we have.
Are you still getting a lot of phone calls like this?
Absolutely.
And that didn't alarm you?
I mean, I think no matter what time we're going to get a lot. We've been telling people. I've been telling my board of directors for 3 years, and now it's application time. Now all of a sudden the sky's falling. I think no matter what the time frame is, that's going to be the case.
I voted for the legislation on the committee that 2 years ago. I'm in support of it, but I do think that there are many people out there who just need a little more time, and we very definitive in the bill when that time is. This would be the first time we extended it. I mean, we really have extended it since everything is in place. This would be the first time. And I just think that the purpose of this legislation wasn't to put people out of business.
Correct.
It was really just to regulate it.
That's correct. Because
we've had complaints from people about, shabby work and folks messing folks up in either home repair or just building new homes, stuff like that. I just think that the state ought to be the one to go a step further and give them opportunity. There are some good people out there, but who will get put out of business if we don't just give a little more time. So, even though I'm in support of the new bill and implementation of it, I'd like for y'all to just open up your heart and just stay in it just a little longer so people can qualify.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Suzanne Williams. I represent the Home Builders Association of Georgia and have been doing so for about 17 years. I appreciate my friend, very good friend, David Ralston, coming to me before he introduced this piece of legislation he feels is needed. I'm echoing Mr. Woodall's comments, everything he says. As y'all probably noticed that during the session we're attached at the hip, so I don't think I need to restate what he has stated. I would like to say, though, the other problem with extending it is as Mr. Woodall said, we're going to be having a glitch bill because as the board starts promulgating rules, we're finding things of unintended consequences that we're going to have to come back and fix in 07. And by opening this piece of legislation, it could become a Christmas tree of all different kinds of things that could really inhibit us from getting the true fixes done next year. So, with all due respect, once again, to Mr. Ralston, we would prefer you to not support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You guys are pulling a late day here today. This bill was brought to us by the Board of Pharmacy as a result of some pretty severe problems we've had with our technicians across the way. What has happened is we've got no way of tracking our technicians that might have a drug problem, that might have a theft problem, that might work in a pharmacy. They could quit tomorrow and then go to work for another pharmacy without any way of us knowing it. And all this bill does is it requires pharmacies to list their technicians to the Board of Pharmacy so that they can track the people where they're working when they've got a problem. And essentially that's all it is in a nutshell.
You just did that bill that quick?
We try to get out of here.
Oh, very good. I hope you might feel the same way about me. I am. I'm going to hand. Well, as a, you know, as a professor, I like to hand out papers. I've been called worse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm here today to present House Bill 702. House Bill 702 deals with regulating Georgia tanning facilities. And I'm passing out some information right now that just a brief overview of what the issue involves. And I'll go through that just quickly. The legislative brief on the very front page talks about skin cancer prevention and control. The next page lists 15 other states who have current statutes regulating tanning facilities. And then the following articles indicate, as I'm hoping that you will agree with me, that skin cancers are increasing, especially in children who are using tanning facilities. Under current Georgia law right now, There is a law that addresses tanning facilities. However, it is toothless and meaningless. And what I would like to do, and the purpose of House Bill 702, is to add a little strength to the bill in that it would require facilities to actually be licensed. Right now, if you drive down the road, you see a big sign. It says tanning facilities, right? You go into a nail salon, you go into a spa, and you see a tanning bed. None of these facilities are licensed whatsoever. I called the Secretary of State's office and when I began this process, and I said, can you please pull for me all the licensed tanning bed facilities in the state of Georgia? And they said, I'm sorry, we can't do that. The only way to do that would be to pull a business license, which they don't have either. Is that correct? So there's no way for me to tell you right now how many tanning beds are out there. But what I can tell you, and what the the president of the Dermatological Society will tell you here in the state of Georgia, is that cancer incidences are increasing at a dramatic rate as a result of tanning bed exposures. So the intent of this law is to, number one, bring tanning beds under a regulatory authority, which they are not presently. I've asked via this statute to put them under the Department of Natural Resources because natural resources deals with radiation protection, and tanning beds are a form of radiation. They are non-ionizing radiation. I've also asked via this bill is to not only license them, but to provide a provision to inspect them. So someone needs to go out and see on an annual basis if, in fact, the rules are being followed as it relates to their operations. And lastly, I guess the most important thing to me is that parents must consent between the ages of 13 and 18 to allow their children to utilize a tanning bed. Now, I'm sure that there are a lot of people in here who probably would not raise their hand if I look back and said, how many of you have used a tanning bed? And I would say, shame on you. Because tanning beds are as dangerous as cigarettes. I know, it's true. It is absolutely true that they are as dangerous in that the exposure is so concentrated in such a short amount of time that the cell damage that you are exposed to can cause cancer. And you may not believe it. I have brought a technical expert to help me with regard to that. But the intent of the bill is to bring tanning beds under regulation within the state of Georgia. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I used to own them, so I guess that's bad on my part, and I enjoyed them. Talking about the children, we're getting a little bit into parenting from the legislature, and that's something I'm a little bit against. Because shouldn't the parents, they got the responsibility now and authority to tell their children if something's bad for them, do they not?
Did you vote on the parental permission bill for after-school clubs?
I have no idea. I don't think I did, if I'm not mistaken.
So to answer your question would be, children can go in and expose themselves to a hazard without their parents' permission currently.
But that's a parent's responsibility to know what their child's doing.
As a parent, I would like to be informed. I would like to know that my child was going into a facility, and I would sign a permission slip that would say yes or no.
Permission slip provided by the state, correct? That's what you're trying to mandate?
Permission slip that would be provided by the facility that would be originated by the state.
How much is it going to cost DNR to go to every single place, whether it be condos, apartments, health club, hair salon, whatever, and check every single one of these tanning beds?
I can't tell you that because I don't know how many tanning beds are out there.
Are there safety devices on the tanning beds?
I'm sure that there are.
And once again, it wouldn't be the personal responsibility of the individual going into a business to make sure.
There
what
are
they're getting
also
into is
hazard
safe.
warnings on cigarettes, too.
Yes, there is.
But what I'm speaking of, and there's laws that would regulate children from smoking cigarettes. Is that not true? So all I'm doing is asking for a law to regulate children from being able to go into a facility and being overexposed to a potential carcinogen.
Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it at this last comment. Once again, getting the DNR involved, I'd like to have some type of fiscal note from the state saying how much it's going to cost for them to do that. And once again, I'll just leave it with the phrase, I don't think we should parent. We can't legislate good parenting from the House of Representatives.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Representative Freeman.
If you said that if we regulate it, is it going to prevent skin cancer?
That's the intent.
And how do you, I mean, you're not opposed to tanning beds, are you?
No, I'm not asking to ban tanning beds. What I'm asking to do is regulate them.
And how will regulating stop skin cancer?
Well, when we regulate all types of exposures. We regulate X-rays exposures, we regulate cigarettes, we regulate speed, and so we hope that via regulation that we will control some types of behavior.
Isn't it current law right now? You talked about the children, and Lord knows I want to protect my child, but isn't it current law that they can't use a tanning bed without permission of the adult already?
It is current law right now that they have to have a permission slip, yes.
Written.
That's correct.
And isn't that what you were asking to regulate?
I'm asking for a permission slip at the facility where the parent will come and sign it. I'm not asking for a child to bring in a permission slip with them. Because we do know that some kids may, forge their parent's signature.
Okay, I see the difference. It's hard. I didn't realize you wanted a parent to actually come to the facility, but
I do. I want a parent to come in, and I want them to say, oh, "It's okay for my daughter to use the tanning bed," now. And I think the parent should be informed, as long as, in addition to the child, of what kind of hazard that the child is exposing themselves to, because children under the age of 18 their cells are still dividing, they are still growing, and therefore increased exposure with regard to ionizing or non-ionizing radiation increases the risk of cancer.
Representative Dixon.
He asked the question that I asked him.
They don't have to. They can just present. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Vice Chairman Tummer.
Yes, Representative, on page 6, you refer to the report that's supposed to sent to the Federal Food and Drug Administration. Is that something they solicit, or do they monitor tanning beds?
They do. They do. They would be the ones that would stamp the seal of approval on a tanning bed.
Thank you.
Representative Von Epps.
Representative Drimmer, let me thank you for bringing this issue to the forefront. I think as a legislative body, we do have some responsibility to oversee issues of concern to public health, and I just want to acknowledge that you brought a good issue to the table, and I hope the General Assembly will give serious consideration to the passage in support of this bill.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I'll lie to you, just one last one.
Okay, one last one.
I want to see you again.
Representative Beard.
Can the sun cause skin cancer?
Yes, the sun can cause skin cancer, but actually, the clouds shield a lot of the harmful UVA, UVB, and UVC rays. However, when you are using a tanning bed, there is no shielding there. This is a concentrated form of ultraviolet light, which has no distance, no shielding, and we rely strictly on time.
Will there be a punishment for children playing outside with no shirt on if they don't have sunscreen? If we're going to try to regulate skin cancer?
I'll let the dermatologist answer that question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'd like to thank the committee and Chairman and Representative Drenner for asking me to participate. I'm Dr. Goldsmith. I'm current president of the Georgia Society of Dermatologists, and hopefully I'll put some of these comments in some perspective. I want to give a brief history of the tanning bed and simplify some of the discussion that's just been had. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it'd been recognized for a long time that there were two main types of ultraviolet radiation, ultraviolet A, ultraviolet B. Both are in sunlight. Ultraviolet B was known to be more carcinogenic. And so at that time, tanning beds started developing tanning facilities that just use ultraviolet A and promoting them as a, quote, safe tan. And at that point, it actually was not unreasonable to do so. Since that time, every science at every level refutes that claim. It is known that that if the skin is tanned, it means that there has been injury to the skin at a molecular level and that the skin is trying to protect itself. There is no such thing as a safe tan, and it's a molecular impossibility. It's known that all tan means that there has been DNA damage, the same type of DNA damage that causes cancer. The Department of Health and Human Services lists all type of ultraviolet radiation as carcinogenic, including all artificial ultraviolet radiation. So on a scientific level, it's not arguable at this point to try to argue that tanning beds cause cancer or not. They do. Now that's the scientific level, and then I'll bring it up to the population level. This is I don't know how easily people can see this. It's just a cover of a young girl from magazine Skin and Aging with the cover story "Pediatric Melanoma on the Rise." And this is what's the anecdotal evidence that's out there. Oklahoma City dermatologist Mark Naylor won't soon forget the teenage patient who showed up in his office a few years ago to have him check a suspicious growth on her buttocks, which on pathology was found to be a melanoma. It turned out that she was working in a tanning salon where one of the so-called benefits was free tanning, Dr. Naylor recalls. And in early January, Dr. Naylor removed an atypical nevus from another teen who also happened to work in a tanning facility. Now, for years, there have been increasing anecdotal reports, just one dermatologist seeing skin cancers in numbers and locations that had never been seen before the use of tanning beds. Now to the population level, major studies. In August, Mayo Clinic study showed that the rate of basal cell carcinoma in women between the ages of 20 and 40 had tripled in the last 30 years. Now, it was also known that in this same population, 1 out of 3 females has tanning bed exposure. Now, I don't know many ways that there could be an increased skin cancer in Minnesota in the last 30 years. Now, surely there is travel more, but there was a lot of travel at least 10 and 20 years ago as well. There's a 60% increase in melanoma in 20 and 30-year-olds in Swedish people, in Swedish females who have had tanning bed exposure. All types of skin cancer, basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, melanoma, all have shown to have increases due to tanning bed exposure. So on a population level, on an individual dermatologist level, and on a molecular level, it's undeniable that at this point it's undeniable that tanning beds increase the risk of skin cancer. Secondly, is tanning bed exposure frequent? Well, Representative Drenner alluded to the fact that I think anybody who drives around knows how common tanning bed facilities are. Some towns have as many tanning facilities as stoplights if you drive through the country in South Georgia where I'm from. But there are more documented large studies. 2003 study from the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. 28% of female adolescents, 7% of male adolescents reported 3 or more exposures to sunscreen. So that's almost 1 out of 3. More than 1 out of 4 had at least 3 exposures. Of major significance, 11% of, or 12.6% of so-called poor tanners went to a tanning bed. And this is the population that would be most at risk, are people who really can't tan. The next point, as far as the regulation of, and the reason that there really is a need for regulation of tanning beds is because, yes, there is supposed to be consent, and there's supposed to be even warning labels, and there's supposed to be information given out. A 2005 Consumer Reports studied 296 tanning facilities in 12 cities, asked only 6 questions. Only 1% asked 6 questions of the employees in tanning beds. Only 1% of the employees asked got all 6 questions right, and the average was 3 or 4 of 6 questions answered gave misleading or wrong information. 75% of the employees said that you could come as often as you wanted, even if a beginner. 35% denied that either premature aging or a skin cancer risk was due to tanning bed exposure. And of major importance, 20% said minors could come without consent. So yes, they're supposed to, but do they actually check it? And the answer is no. I had intended for somebody, a high school senior in my hometown, interviewed me a week and a half ago because how common it was that all of her classmates went. They went without parental consent. They went whether they had gotten burned or not. One of her friends has already had a melanoma. And also, and again, this is the type of anecdotal thing, her mother, when I talked to her mother about this issue, the tanning bed facility had just called to remind her that her year's fee had run out, and did she want to? They were asking to speak to the daughter, not the mother, and were asking her to renew. The American Academy of Dermatology recommendation is that tanning bed exposure under the age of 18 should be banned. It's that significant; it causes that much of a problem. Many states have had similar measures as this, and I would urge passage. There has to be some means of regulation. As far as the issues, and this is just my own personal comment, you can't regulate parenting, but whether it's drinking or smoking or going to an R-rated movie, there are a lot of ways that we regulate, and the system is currently not working now, and actually more parents would applaud this legislation than would be offended. If they want their children to go, and they're willing to bring them down, then this law doesn't actually ban the use. But it does, but a lot of parents, as my oldest child is 13, we're getting into that, but from what I've been told, a lot of teenagers do things that their parents don't know about and wouldn't want them to do. I'd like to close with a letter to the editor that was from the Albany Herald approximately 4 weeks ago. I'm not going to read the whole letter. The title is Parents Educate Kids About Risks of the Sun. 3 weeks ago, at the age of 37, with a single tear escaping and cascading down his cheek, our youngest son silently passed into the presence of his higher power. Every day since, the least little reminder is capable of sending us into spasms of horrible, seemingly unending grief, but we know that in time we will recover and our hearts will mend. And now I'm just going to read this one paragraph. Parents need to become aware of the causes of melanoma and do all within their power to prevent its invasion into the lives of their offspring, especially red or fair-haired, light-complexioned children. Early childhood sunburns, exposure to the sun's rays during outdoor work or recreation, and tanning beds, which, in my opinion, should be outlawed. These parents writing, all contribute to the likelihood of its development. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brandon Hembry, and I'm with Massey & Bowers, and we represent a organization called the Indoor Tanning Association. They have several hundred members here in Georgia. Most of those members are small, female-owned businesses. And this legislation is actually much broader than what you would just think of as a traditional tanning facility. I'm not going to give you any false notions about my technical expertise on this issue. I'm not a dermatologist and I don't own a tanning facility, and we were just given notice about this bill this morning, and quite frankly that's not enough time to get anybody from the industry down here to talk about their concerns with the legislation. We share some of the same concerns and questions that you have raised today, and in light of that, we would like to ask that the committee not pass this bill out and give us the opportunity to work on this issue over the summer, specifically looking at how it impacts tanning facilities, but also how it impacts DNR, which is given the regulatory authority over this issue in the bill.
Bill, with you?
I do.
On page 2, I want you to look at, and by all means, I'll let the representative make a comment on this too if you like. Line 2, page 8. I'm sorry, page 2, line 8. Tanning facility means any location, place, area, structure, or business, or a part thereof which provides consumers access to tanning equipment. Tanning facility includes, but is not limited to, tanning salons, health clubs, apartments, or condominiums, regardless of whether a fee is charged for access to the tanning equipment. This just caught my attention. If I have one of these in my home, I let 3 or 4 of my friends use this for tanning. You may not be able to speak for the industry. Y'all feel like we would have to, as a homeowner, have to contact DNR and be regulated by them in our home? By the way this is written?
I can't answer that question, but there's a lot of language in this bill that's very vague and that calls to question issues like that which you have just raised.
I'm not an attorney, so I wouldn't know, but I'm sure it's not the intent, but the way it's written was my concern.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, it's not necessarily for the presenter, but can we ask legal counsel, is that the way that's written in that section, and obviously what happens is you focus, I would assume, on the word consumers, and you flip back to the front page to the definition of the word consumers, and all it says is any individual who's provided access to a tanning facility. Would that possibly bring home use? And if friends were over there and somebody saw a tanning booth, say, hey, I want to hop in your tent, would that bring home use into this legislation?
There's certainly an argument that it could. If I could just have 1 minute to look at the bill.
And I was just thinking another way. I know the author. I don't believe has any inkling of doing that. But if somewhere in here we could just put nothing in this code section shall, bring home use into this, or however the legal wordsmithing goes for that. Just dealing with that, maybe that would alleviate some concerns that Representative Bearden might have on that to bring it home. Because I certainly don't think we ought to be telling people how to use legal equipment in their own home.
Any other questions for the speaker that you look this up? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else to speak on this issue?
about exemptions within the chapter. And in Code Section 31-38-2, subsection C, it says an individual is exempt from the provisions of this chapter to the extent that such individual owns tanning equipment exclusively for personal and non-commercial use. So the exemption is not contained within the bill, but it is contained within code sections that already exist in the chapter that are not affected by this bill. So those exemptions that are presently in 31-38-2 remain in place.
Okay. Anyone else to speak on the bill? Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass. Second. Any further discussion? Excuse me. With the author's permission, without objection, that we're going to have to put an amendment with the effective date from January 06/07.
Absolutely. Legislative Council's already marked this up because this is introduced in 05. Can I give this to you, Mr. Chairman, because there are some inconsistencies in it.
Okay. Motion on the second. Any further discussion? Yes. I'd like to be recognized for a substitute making that. A substitute motion is in order at this time.
Recommend that we table this issue until we can bring more parties to the table to discuss it.
Okay, there's a motion and a second that we table the bill. Any discussion on that? All right, call the question. Is all in favor of tabling the bill, House Bill 702, signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, we're going to call for the ayes and nays. All those in favor of tabling the bill, raise your hand. Those opposed, say that the bill is approved. That motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
Bill goes out with a new pass recommendation. All right, let me, before he comes on board, we've got House Bill 1391. Representative Burkhalter, Speaker Pro Tem, is off of this bill, and he is not going to be able to make it, so he has designated the chairman of the committee to present the bill. I move to pass. Second, my vice chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not one of my favorite things to be called upon to introduce a bill I didn't sign, but we're talking about House Bill 1391, which basically changes the membership vacancies and qualifications of the residential and building general contractors. All this bill does is add an additional member. It designates them on the various committees. The residential contractor shall have 8 members. The residential shall have 7. All this takes effect in July of '07, and that's all the bill does. So I appreciate the favorable consideration of this bill. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Could I ask the presenter one?
Yes,
friendly
Mr.
question?
Chairman, I'll be happy to try to answer it for you.
I know this, we might have to work this out together. On page 2, line 19, in lieu of Representative Ralston's bill, it's got effective July the 1st, 2007, and I think we changed the date to 2008 with his bill.
I don't know whether these are tied together, piggybacked or not. I think it's
I'm just curious.
I think we, in abundance of caution, we don't know how far Resident Ralston's bill is going to make it in the process.
Right.
If that bill passes, we'll take precedent.
Okay.
I'm sure we ought to move the water.
We'll let this be a standalone bill.
Yes, sir.
I mean, all this bill does is add a new amendment. I don't see how that affects what we did with Ralston bill.
That's all it does. I don't think it has anything to do with Representative Ralston's bill, to be honest with you. So I'd urge the committee to favorably pass. Thank you.
It takes 15 members to regulate the contractors, but it only takes 5 to regulate the cemeteries. Is that right?
This is tough. This is a tough occupation to be.
Is anybody in the audience that would like to speak either for or against the bill? Please come forward. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Suzanne Williams again. With all due respect and for the reasons stated before the other bill, I am obligated to my association, the people that sign my paycheck. We do oppose this bill.
Anyone else speak on the bill? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to pass.
Any get a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Bill goes out with a do pass recommendation. Representative, you've already had one today. Representative Graves, you want to let Representative Stevens?
Oh, yeah, he's much more work.
Okay.
Well, I don't know about that now.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. What you've got here in front of you is House Bill 1507, which is strictly a voluntary bill to fix a growing problem we've got in our pharmaceutical industry regarding prior approval. Prior approval today is the only method, Mr. Chairman, that we can have of controlling cost of drugs. Unfortunately, what's happened is particular drugs in specific classes have gotten to a point they're not available to the general public. I believe that this particular bill will go a long way towards solving some of that problem. There's an awful lot of people here to speak. There's an awful lot of people that have come to me and said that we've got some work on that, Mr. Chairman. So I'm moving that we pull the bill in lieu of a study committee.
Okay. Okay, I think Representative Graves wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You gave me the opportunity to do it, and I deferred to Representative Stevens. I may want to step up and change that deferment now. But thank you, Representative Stevens. I'm sure that there's many people in the audience who would like to work with you over the summer in perfecting this legislation.
Any objection?
Representative Stevens, you realize that this committee will not meet again.
Yes, sir.
So if we talk about crossover day to try to get something perfected between now and then, it's probably going to be almost impossible.
Yes, sir. We're looking for over the summer.
Okay. Do you want to put it in the study committee or request that it be put into one?
Exactly. That's
okay.
my motion.
All right. Any second on that? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay. In the study committee it goes. We can get the speaker to give us one. Okay. House Bill 938 by Representative Graves. Hold on just a minute. Hold on just a minute, David. Let the crowd kind of. You might want to get rid of some of them. Okay. Representative Graves.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I appreciate you holding the most important consumer-friendly piece of legislation today till last. Supposed to laugh about that. Anyway, I bring you House Bill 938, which deals with the licensing of surgical assistants in this state. What you may not realize when you say surgical assistants, you may think that a surgical assistant is someone that just passes instruments from a table to a physician, and that is, nothing could be further from the truth. Currently, surgical assistant is a highly skilled medical professional which is qualified by academic and clinical education that assists in medical procedures. These persons that actually perform this are actually cutting, suturing, have their hands in your body during surgical procedures, and to many people's amazement, they are not licensed in the state of Georgia. What I have before you is a bill that will do just that. If you'll follow through with me, I'm going to just quickly run through what the bill does, and then some of the surgical assistants here have a brief video to actually show you what we're talking about. If you'll indulge me, it's a very brief video, and then I'm going to ask some of them to address the members of the committee about what they do, and then I'll be happy to wrap up and answer any questions. Page 1 of the bill, as you'll see down there, line 16 starts with the definitions, and one of the important ones is on line 20, which is the board. That means the Composite Board of Medical Examiners. We are not creating a new board. We're creating a new license group, but they're going to be under the Composite Board of Medical Examiners, which licenses physicians in our state. On page 2, we continue on down there. Line 6, surgical assistant will be defined as those things from line 9 to 18. Line 19 it talks about powers of the board, determining qualifications and fitness for application, adopting and revising rules, giving the examination, having hearings, dealing with complaints. Over on page 3, starting in line 4, you've got the requirements to become a licensed surgical assistant, and those are just the basic things: 21 years of age, completed the application, any fees, completed the surgical assistant education program, and as you see, it just goes down from there, talking about those particular items. On page 4, it deals with reciprocity to other states who have licensed, certified, or registered surgical assistants that are in good standing with that state and meet at least the minimum requirements of what our state has. They may be more requirements in that state, but they have to at least meet the requirements that we have in the state of Georgia and put forth here. You'll start on line 9. It talks about persons who are not required to be a license holder under this code section. And I might add on line 14, it was brought to my attention, number 3, it starts off a health care worker. I would ask for an amendment here that change that from health care worker to health care professional. That is currently defined in the code, and health care worker is not. So I would ask the committee at the appropriate time to please accept that amendment. On line 16, it starts with a type of grandfather code, talking about prior to July 1st, 2006, the board may issue licenses based upon those requirements there. Line 28, it goes into the licensure procedure where the license will be valid for 2 years. The license holder must maintain at all times their license, be in good standing. That continues on over to page 5. Line 17 on page 5 deals with provisional licenses. Who may get that? They have to submit evidence to the board that they successfully completed the education program, be under the supervision and direction of a licensed surgical assistant. Those provisional licenses will only be good for 1 year because by that time they should have taken their or full examination to become a licensed surgical assistant. And of course, line 27, a person who fails any portion of the licensure exam, their provisional license will automatically be revoked. They will not continue to practice under a provisional license if they cannot pass the regular examination. Line 29, page 5, and continuing on throughout the bill, just deals with powers, other powers of the board, refusing to grant licenses, conditions and penalties that they will have, and those being fail to demonstrate the qualifications and standards, knowingly made misleading or deceptive or untrue representations, and just those basic standard things that you would see in any other licensing action throughout a bill. The last section on page 8 deals with the board, that again being the Board of Composite Medical Examiners, will appoint an advisory committee of a cross-section of cultural backgrounds of surgical assistants, and those people will serve at no compensation service to the committee. While I am eager to answer your questions, I'm sure there will be some, I think before we get to that point, if it'd be all right with you, Mr. Chairman, Scott Forte and Ann Shaker have been working with me on this issue, and I'd like to maybe turn it over to them for a brief moment in time. Maybe they want to make a statement or go directly to the video.
Okay.
Thank you. And Scott?
Go to the video first.
Okay. Someone that's a little more technically adept than I may want to push the on button. I missed that. Tape coming.
It was looking perfect earlier.
One other quick thing while he's bringing that up, it's been brought to my attention on page 4, line 16, it says prior to July 1st, 2006. If we would change that to 2007, that's dealing with the grandfather issue because, again, as we introduced this last year and did not get to it, it gives a little bit longer window there because it would only have a very short period of time and the board wouldn't even be able to get all their things together. Page 4, line 16, change 2006, 2007.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Chris Swindle. I'm a surgical assistant here in Atlanta. And I just want to give you a little brief view of actually what we do every day in the OR and why this licensure bill is so important. Here we go. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah. Apologize. They never worked when we came in here early, actually. Down in the corner. No. Okay. Okay, you can put the arrow on that, Scott. And just to let you know ahead of time, there are really only two people in this room right now in this film, or three actually. There's one that's not seen, which is a circulating nurse. That are actually licensed in performing surgery in the OR. You can go ahead and get that. And just think to yourselves while we're watching this, if you can tell which one is the physician and which one is the surgical assistant.
That's not you. They're working on it.
No, it's like 5 more seconds or a minute, and he's going to pull the uterus out. Okay. Okay. That's just a small view of what we do. This is just one procedure. We operate on backs, we operate on hips, knees. We actually do vascular neurosurgery. And currently, right now, the only person licensed in the state of Georgia is the surgeon, which I'll tell you is on the right, and the anesthesiologist or the nurse anesthetist, which is behind the screen there, and the circulating nurse, which you can't see, which is roaming out in the back of the view. This bill is important because it's all about the safety of the patient. Right now, there's no regulatory commission to say what the standards are for an individual to be a surgical assistant, and right now the different attributes that it takes to be a surgical assistant aren't mandated. And with this bill, as Representative Graves says, we want to set the standard for surgical assistants in the state of Georgia to protect basically all citizens. When they go into surgery, they know that the hands are capably trained, and it's just not someone just off the street that filled out a paperwork correctly with the hospital to gain their credentials to become a surgical assistant. Now I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. As the video shows, it's pretty difficult to tell who is and who is not the MD in that particular video. Both seem be doing basically the same thing. Yes, there is someone there that's responsible, someone there who's a direct supervisor, but what could happen as the person on the left who is a surgical assistant, if something happens and that physician decides, I'm not going to use you anymore, either due to not performing their duties appropriately, putting them in unsafe situations, and they says, I don't want to use you anymore, I'm going to release you from my charge, I'm not going to be your supervising physician any longer, the person can pack up, take his stuff, go somewhere else in the state and say, hey, I'm a trained surgical assistant. And there's no real patient safety there. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do is to create this patient safety mechanism so we know who these people are, what they're doing, and have a minimum level of competency and standards there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Von Epps.
What are the basic criteria for being a surgical assistant? I saw some.
You want to answer that?
Operating
Representative Von Epps, it's a 2-year training period. 2 years, yes, sir. Your first year is didactic. When you're in the classroom, learning your anatomy, your physiology, your biology. The second year is clinical. We're actually in the operating room with other trained surgical assistants, learning different techniques, the different surgeries, and actually how to assist on each surgery. So it's a 2-year program.
And I guess as a follow-up, so basically it seemed like the surgical assistant was doing as much work as the doctor did. Is that right?
Yes, sir. We do. We essentially become the right hand of the surgeon. And currently, there, like I said before, there's no regulatory committee to keep an untrained individual from the OR.
Representative Freeman.
Do you know what other states are doing this and across the country?
Currently, right now, it's Texas, Mississippi, or not Mississippi, Florida, South Carolina, Kentucky, Illinois, Colorado, Washington, and Virginia has legislation pending right now, and if I'm not mistaken, Maryland is another state.
Is that 10, 15, something like that?
Yes, sir.
Vice Chairman Tumlin.
The concept here is a little bit different, that the board is still the regulatory authority, and what we're doing here today is, not to minimize it, but it's just creating an advisory board, right?
Yes, sir. Well, no, not really. No, sorry.
Well, it's a little
It's
bit
a
more
little different than
intense
that.
We are actually creating a new licensed health care practitioner in this state. They are not currently licensed. That's part of the problem. We do not have that. Now, what we're doing, they're having an advisory committee of themselves. What is different is we're not creating a separate board of licensed surgical assistants. They will be under the board, the Composite Board of Medical Examiners. So that board makes all these decisions, but with consultation of this advisory committee of surgical assistants. So we are actually licensing a new group that is not licensed.
So in other words, these folks now can do what the bill provides, except they're not licensed to do it. In other words, they're out here in Georgia now performing these procedures without being licensed to.
That person right there that you saw on that video is a surgical assistant on the left. That person right there with the red dot on them, but it's not a licensed person in the state of Georgia.
They'll still be allowed to do what your bill is hoping to.
What this is, they're going to still be able to do this, but they will be licensed. There'll be a basic standard set. And I do want to be fair to others. There's been a lot of conversation from hospital groups around the state, and there may be some here that want to speak. I don't know. We've been working with them on that. There is some concern about creating, as there is with any other entity, creating a new group, and that they will be forced to use them and things like that. So those conversations are ongoing. I don't want to make it sound like that there is no one opposed to this. I did mention that I told the hospital associations I would, mention that, but they may or may not be here at this time. But there are conversations ongoing about dealing with that particular issue.
Representative
Dean, but even on here, that person is working under a doctor.
Always in a direct supervision of a physician.
And even if you license, you're going to be on the doctor.
Always, yes, sir.
That's part of the reason we're having it under the medical board.
Right.
They have to be there, and so that is so that the physicians board will be the one that actually sets the standards and training and the requirements for these people.
To follow up where you're going, Representative Graves, a hospital, they're still not precluded from using somebody that's not licensed in this area.
Nothing in this statute requires them to use any license. That doesn't deal with that issue at all.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else want to speak on the bill? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for letting me speak for a few minutes. And actually, I appreciated the video. I'm actually a surgeon. My name is David Koval. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, so I actually use first assistance all the time. I'm with Resurgence Orthopedics. It's the largest orthopedic group in Atlanta, and actually in Georgia. We have over 80 physicians. We treat over close to half a million people a year. I personally have practiced for about 16 years. I'm a hip and knee surgeon. I do a lot of total hips and total knees. And without my first assistant, who's a certified first assistant, I wouldn't be able to do my job effectively, efficiently, as well as I do it. And I think that licensing these people is a really important thing that the state can do. I mean, when you look at it, there's a lot of people who require licenses. As a physician, I require a license. You regulate me. Nurses require licenses. Cosmetologists require licenses. And actually, the barber that cuts the 2 hairs on my head requires a license. So I think we do that to regulate the industry. We ensure that each of us have the proper knowledge, skill sets, background, experience to do our job properly and safely. And I think by passing this bill, we would promote a improved and stronger certification of first assistants. We would allow for better safety in the OR, which I think is a paramount concern at this point, because you can see they're directly, intimately involved in doing surgery on a day-to-day basis. I think also it's important to realize that we must kind of limit or at least control the number of lesser qualified people that get into the OR. This bill would, in essence, kind of prevent or limit some of the people without the qualifications, without the experience, without the knowledge to perform these things safely from getting a license and from getting into the OR. Now, when you think about, I don't know how many of you have hip or knee surgery. I bet a few over the years. Thank you, Representative Dean. Not me, I hope. Okay, thank you. It is, just think of it, one of us are our parents who are exposed to the dangers and the sophistication of surgical procedures, and having someone who is unlicensed, not that they say they're not qualified, but it is important to go that extra mile to get them licensed, to respect and recognize that they are professionals and they're an important part of the healthcare delivery system, especially in the OR. So I feel that this committee, if you would, support this bill, because I think it would add a lot to the first assistance that we have and help regulate and give respect to a profession that deserves it. Thank you. Any questions?
Second.
Any further discussion? We've got an amendment to read on line 14 on page 4, change the word worker to professional, and change the date on line 16 to say 2007. So, entertain a vote on House Bill 938